26th on a Thursday afternoon. We are privileged to be here together in the oasis of peace, Wahat and Salam. And the privilege of looking together at the theme of the retreat. There's no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. So what is happiness for us? What is the way to happiness? Maybe we can ask ourselves, can we hold happiness in the midst of chaos and suffering? Why is it important to do so? And how do we do it? What resources do we have? And how do we generate and sustain joy and happiness in this life, in these times, for ourselves and for others? If we don't have the answers now, maybe we will have them in a few days. And anyone who has them can share them with all of us, because we're all here learning. So our teacher Thich Nhat Hanh talks about the intricate interbeing nature of suffering and happiness, with the understanding that they are not separate. He tells us that the foundation of happiness is mindfulness, being alive and being present. And as his practical way, he says, if we are not aware that we are happy, then we are really not happy. And I'm quoting him here, he goes on to say that our notions about happiness entrap us. And we forget that they are just ideas. Our idea of happiness can prevent us from actually being happy. We fail to see the opportunity for joy that is right in front of us when we are caught in the belief that happiness should take a particular form. The words joy and happiness, we had some talk about it before the retreat, the organizers, and they're often interchanged and swapped. They're actually two different sensations. Joy being more a feeling, even a physical feeling, sometimes fleeting, and happiness being more kind of a bedrock of contentment, which lasts a long time and which can be present together with suffering. Everybody knows the story of the man in the desert who's very thirsty, hasn't had anything to drink for a few days, and he sees an oasis with water, and his heart leaps with joy, and he runs towards the oasis. And then he puts his mouth down and he drinks some water, and he experiences happiness. So they're not mutually exclusive or inclusive. Joy and happiness have many different flavors. And I'm paraphrasing this wonderful teacher, James Barras. He said, they might overflow from us in song or dance, or they might gently arise as a sense of inner fullness. And they are not something that we have to manufacture. And they are already in us. And what we are doing here during these days, in these perfect conditions, is to unravel, unwind, peel away all of these coverings that prevent us from being able to touch seeds of joy and happiness which already exist within us. So we're extending an invitation to be aware and to be awake, to spend some time letting go of the knots that bind us, and maybe looking at things that we habitually turn away from or are afraid to look at. It's a kind of a journey of discovery together. When we're not mindful and in a state of forgetfulness, we have a tendency to just take the same old paths that we normally take. Habit energies. So here, we hope that the conditions will be provided and that you yourself will bring yourself to a commitment that each moment of every day you will be fully alive to whatever comes up. Inviting mindfulness in these places where we were usually are often unconscious. So we will be open to the schedule, to the silence, to the commitment, to everything that we have here during the retreat. And not just going into a routine of a retreat. You know, we're in a retreat, we have to do this, do that. Following the rules, we bring our whole selves entirely into every single moment. And observing the quality of our mind, what we are allowing ourselves to think or not think. Usually in our daily lives, we tend to use words and doing to relieve our own suffering. It's a habit energy. So here we're asking for support for silence and maintaining an energy of silence during the retreat, but not just from words, from overthinking. It's not an enforced silence, it's a kind of a stillness that we're resting into, relaxing into, of being and not doing. And like a gardener sowing seeds and providing the conditions for the seeds to flower and to flourish. According to Buddhist psychology, we have 51 seeds in us. And these include seeds of happiness and of joy, and of anger, envy, and many other desires. And for humans, it seems that the seeds which bring us suffering are the ones that have a tendency to crop up and come uninvited into our consciousness. So we have to work sometimes a little bit harder to train ourselves to water the seeds of happiness and of joy. And knowing that, as Thai reminds us, that lotus flowers don't grow on concrete, they need mud. So our suffering can also be seen as the mud or the compost from which we will grow feelings of well-being, of happiness, and they can exist together. This was difficult for me to accept in the beginning when I heard it first, because we have a tendency when we're suffering to be completely suffering, where the whole of us are suffering, from the hair of our head to the toes of our feet, we're in suffering. And we forget that it's just a part of us. It's a fleeting visitor. The fleeting might be 20 years, but it's still fleeting. This we should remember, yeah. This week, a few days ago, we were listening to a young man whose father and mother were killed during on October the 7th in a moshav in the south. And somebody asked him, how does he feel now? And he said, I cry at least 3 times a day. But this is the most alive and exciting period of my life. After transforming and deep looking at all of the suffering that I have gone through, I've experienced years of intense energy, of mental and spiritual growth, and living a meaningful life. And we know this person for quite some time, and we see it, so it is possible. So we're blessed to be here together in ideal conditions. And we have to remember that when we are suffering, I'm sorry to be talking about suffering at a retreat for happiness, and after today I think we forget about it more or less, but it must be faced. If it's not faced, we can't deal with it. So when we're suffering, as I said earlier, we seem to be very often caught in just, it's like being in a swamp of suffering that you feel that you cannot get out of. And it's very difficult for us to deal with our suffering from a place of suffering. So we need to create kind of containers for ourselves, or some kind of a bank of resources that will hold memories, cellular memories, mental, cognitive memories of joy or of happiness, of well-being. And we can store that and then withdraw. It's like in a bank, withdraw from it when we need it. And I know that in my own life, this is what I do, also for pain, and it works. But first of all, you have to spend some time seeing where you can save or store your good memories. I have it, I'm talking about myself now, but I think it helps everybody. I use my body a lot to be a storing place for happiness, feeling where I feel good. For example, if I go on but it means that there's kind of a decision made that I'm going to store some good feelings. I mightn't even call them happiness, but it's kind of a contentment, an ease. And if I'm on a walk or something, I'll ask myself, where in my body do I feel happy right now? And it's very surprising the kind of answers you get. The first time I asked a question like that to myself, I felt it in the soles of my feet. The moment I thought of it, my feet became warm and cozy. So everybody will feel differently. I mean, I expected it to be somewhere in the chest area, but you have to be open. And afterwards, it was when I was feeling not good about something, it was actually in a dentist's chair, I thought, where do I feel good right now? Where can I remember feeling good to take my mind off where I am right now? And my mind went straight to the soles of my feet. And they tingled and got warm, and I was back in the place where I originally experienced this feeling of ease. So we can make containers for ourselves. Another image I have for myself is when a big rock of suffering comes along, and I see it disturbing my lake. I'm imagining that I'm a lake, and this rock comes along, and I know that if it goes straight into the lake, it's going to fall down to the bottom and muddy the water, and I'm just going to be one big muddy lake. So I imagine that I keep a boat on this lake. So when the rock comes along, I tend to direct it into the boat so that it doesn't go into the lake. And when it's in a boat, it doesn't sink. It's there, and it's kind of manageable. It's like you can move it around. It doesn't mean that the rock isn't there. It just means that it's not just the imagery allows me to have this space so that my suffering doesn't spill over completely. Not on myself and not on others. So, this is who we are. We're like a river of feelings going through us. Every feeling is like a drop of water. And just when we're here, we will have time to look at each of these feelings, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And Pai always reminds us that when something is neutral, you can move it in any direction. You can make it unpleasant or you can make it pleasant. It depends on our mind. Now, when we know the quality of our mind and know how our mind works, we can make ourselves, I can't find the words. So we're not fooling ourselves. And even if we do, it's not so terrible because we're fooling ourselves all the time because we really don't know where we are or who we are, and not really. So this is not something that is not part of our reality. Because if we don't know how to handle our suffering, we will be too weak to deal with it. And happiness is made up of moments. That radiate around us, and we know that it's an energy that affects other people. And it's a responsibility, actually, to help other people also feel good. We know ourselves the effect of a smile. Kai says, sometimes you smile because you're happy, and sometimes when you smile you become happy. And it's also the same with other people. When we smile at people in the street, in the bus, it awakens people's feeling of happiness and connection, which is also a source of happiness. And it's a bit like sunshine, which shines on the vegetation and everything looks different and looks better and is better. It's not hard work. It just shines, and it transforms everything. And I think that Pai's teachings are very, very relevant now. It's also the Buddha. Also in the Anapanasati Sutra, which is one of the first sutras which he gave his pupils or his followers, talks about the mindfulness in your mind, of your body, and one of the exhortations is gladden your mind. So remembering that life is full of suffering, filled with wonders, and to suffer is not enough, and that the wonders of life are in us and around us, everywhere, at any time, and we just have to be available for it. So I'm quoting a reflection from Jack Cornfield on a teaching he received from Pai many, many, many years ago. He said, I had an experience being with a small group of teachers who had gathered to study the Dharma with him. He was teaching about smiling and bringing joy into meditation. At that time, I had imagined that this was a little bit lightweight, to sit and smile, the half smile of the Buddha, when there was so much suffering in the world, the hunger, continuing warfare, racism, poverty, and all of the things that we know about and is going on. And he said, I thought at the time that it was a little bit like pasting a smiley face on top of something deeper. And I wanted something deeper, he said, so that our hearts would open up if we were to become liberated from this moment at this time. And he continued to sit there teaching and smiling. And as I was watching him, I had this strange experience of feeling sadder and more filled with tears and grief than I could have imagined or expected. I couldn't understand it. Was it something in my own history I was touching, of my own trauma and pain? So when I sat next to him at lunch, I asked him quite frankly, Kai, when you were sitting there and teaching smiling and joy, I became very sad and felt a lot of grief. But I don't understand, was it mine or yours? So Kai sat quietly for a moment, and then he looked at me and he said, oh, I have so much grief for what I have seen. That is why I teach joy. So I just end with a few words from an Indian mystic poet from the 16th century. He says, don't go outside your house to see the flowers. Although we have plenty here and we can look at them. My friends, don't bother with that excursion. Inside your body there are many flowers. And each flower can have 1,000 petals. That will do for a place to sit. So it's my invitation to sit on the flowers we have within and to enjoy the garden